Nellore Neuro Club, sir. Our first presentation will be from Dr. Rupam, sir. Role of neurologist in DBS. Our chairpersons will be Dhairyavan, sir, and Kumarvel, sir.
Good afternoon to everyone, and I thank Dr. Raju and the AP Neuroscientist Association Organizing Committee for giving us this opportunity to chair a very important session of neurosciences, namely the Nellore Neuro Club. And Dr. Dhairyavan would like to introduce him, or shall I introduce the speaker?
I'll introduce him.
Yeah, Dr. Dhairyavan will do the introduction of the speaker.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Rupam doesn't need any introduction as such. He is a product of NIMHANS, Bangalore, and he is presently the professor of neurology at a very prestigious institute, Nizams. And his passion for DBS, for movement disorders, is well known all over India, and he trains a lot of residents in his institute, and he has got a lot of publications to his credit, and he's constantly, he's involved in the studies, and his contribution to the movement disorders of at Indian scene is very immense. So I request Rupam to go ahead with his talk on DBS.
Just a minute, I'm stuck somewhere. Thank you. Yes, I'll start. Should I start? I can't hear you. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, you can start.
Okay. The DBS, I think, is quite. Just a minute. DBS we've been doing for the last 20 years, and it's been a very promising therapy. It's been very, very rewarding therapy, and we've had a fair degree of issues, but on the whole, as you get an issue, you try to overcome it as you go. It is basically a good teamwork. If you don't have a team, it doesn't work. So we need to choose the patient properly, get the lead in the right place, do the programming properly, manage the problems later on. You need good patient education and support. But the most important part, and not the least, after the patient, getting the optimal patient, is getting a good team. And that way I've been very fortunate. Dr. Rukmini has been my colleague for initially my student and my colleague for the last 15 years. And Dr. Rajesh has been there for the last quite a few years. And he's done more than 200 to 300 patients surgeries. So we've had a good team going. Now, Parkinson's disease is not, I will be talking mainly on Parkinson's disease because that's where we have the brunt of our experience. We've done around 500 surgeries, and by far the largest number is Parkinson's disease. You can have different types of Parkinson's disease. They can be mild, they could be intermediate, they could be diffuse, malignant. The vast majority of them are usually progressive. They start in India fairly young compared to the West. Most of our patients, which we have operated around 50 years of age or so. And as we know, the clinical symptoms associated with Parkinson's disease is basically a spectrum. And the spectrum is quite wide. It starts with both the non-motor symptoms and the motor symptoms. Initially, we get depression, constipation, which may actually antedate the early onset motor symptoms that are so well known in Parkinson's disease. That is basically bradykinesia, rigidity, and tremor. Moderate stage, we go into fluctuations in dyskinesia, and late stage, we go into other ones, axial deformities, falls, orthostatic tremor, and others. We are associated also at the same time, the associated features of the non-motor symptoms would be the REM behavioral disorders, the depression, the anxiety, constipation, hyposmia, the entire gamut of symptoms are associated. So later on, you develop orthostatic hypotension, dementia, psychotic symptoms. These are the entire spectrum, and all of us are very familiar with this. This is basically for the benefit of the surgeons, if there are any, because of the surgeons. Now, this because of the clinical features. This is the patient who was operated in 2004. He's a lawyer. By 15 years, all of them are bedridden. This guy had 6 years of surgery symptoms, and as you can see, most of the time he used to be off. Off time was very awful for him, though he was on regular medication throughout the day. And off was like this. He used to walk with assistance, severe tremor. On times were good. He was normal or nearly normal. And this is him 6 weeks post surgery. He was operated in 2004. So you can see that he's quite free, though the tremor is still persisting. What is most remarkable about this is that the off symptoms improves markedly. This does not happen with any other form of therapy for Parkinson's disease. Whether it be a apomorphine pump, whether it be a levodopa infusion, duodenal infusion pump, it does not improve the off scores. What both of those other therapies do is that they lengthen the on time, the off time stays short. This is what is very remarkable about DBS, and that's why this is where DBS goes over them. The downside is that DBS is an invasive surgery compared to the other two, which are not invasive, but you do end up carrying your pump around with you in both the apomorphine pump or in the other therapy. This is the same person some 6 years, this is roughly around 9 years down the line, and this is him somewhere 2019 or so. So as you can see, these are patients who used to be confined to the wheelchair by 15 years of disease. This is him 15 years after the surgery, 16 years after the surgery, able to move around all the time. He does have difficulties. It's not that all the difficulties go. It's nothing like that. Off symptoms are still there, but the off symptoms are confined to a mild shuffling and some tremor, but tremor is also very minimal. He has undergone a couple of battery replacements since the original surgery. So this is what is so remarkable about this disease, therapy of this disease, which is called DBS. Now, what is the most important thing? First, what is the role of the neurologist? Get the diagnosis right, choose the right patient, be there in the OT to make sure that you are there for the electrodes to be in the right place. And finally, you have to carry the baby, namely the patient, all along, because the surgeon job is just to do what a visiting father or a visiting colleague does, is basically get the electrodes in the right place. And that is where the teamwork is. But subsequently, all the complications, all the management is the neurologist. So you had better choose the right patient and you had better get the electrodes in the right place in the beginning. Because after that, for the next 2 decades, on the whole, you tend to be looking after all this. What's your problem? You have to make sure that you follow the latest the criteria, which was not there at that point of time. This is the MDS criteria. We were following the CAPSID protocol. We were following the UK Brain Bank criteria. And over time, the criteria evolved. So these are the current standards of determining the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Basically, you need to make sure that you've got your bradykinesia and either residual tremor, and realize that you don't have any absolute exclusion criteria. You need to have 2 or more supportive criteria and no red flags. If you have got a red flag, it should be counterbalanced by the supportive criteria. So that's very, very important in the diagnostic criteria, which is currently from the MDS. You need to rule out the differential diagnosis, rule out secondary Parkinsonism. You need to rule out atypical Parkinsonism. You need to rule out the other neurodegenerative disorders and other diseases. This is very important. You also got to look for the mimics, the tremor mimics, basically the dystonic tremor, the indeterminate, all these you need to lower, the Fragile X, ataxia, tremor ataxia syndrome, the progressive gait disorders which you can get, including NPH. You need to be very careful because NPH can mimic Parkinson's disease like no one's business. There's one, I had a patient who was our own matron's husband. We were about to do DBS and I had a thought that it could be NPH. This is, of course, way back in 2006 or 5. And we did ALP and the patient got better. At that time, it was not such a well-described entity that we knew all about the subcortical dilatation and all that. So you need to be careful and watch that you get the right patients in. So this is the basic evolution of the typical symptoms and treatment of Parkinson's disease. Start with the initial symptoms. Once these motor manifestations are there, by 5 years, you got fluctuations in dyskinesia, and 10, 11 years, you end up with dementia. So you get non-pharmacological treatment, you got anticholinergics. Initially, you can try levodopa, dopamine agonists, MAO-B inhibitors. Then you add on the COMT inhibitors, go on to DBS and continuous drug infusion therapies if the patient has already not undergone this. This is the basic algorithm for managing the Parkinson's disease. I already told you, you start with dopamine agonist or levodopa with or without a COMT inhibitor and combine both in the second stage. And third stage, you can if you have not already done it. We did a lot of work in drug trials, and this was which we published as a lead author. Safinamide was in the market because of that. It's a wonderful drug which needs to be used. We're using it in most of our patients now. In addition to DBS, because side effect, this helps a lot. This is a patient who was also operated around 2004, as you can see. That time his father was there, his wife was there, passed away subsequently. Basically, he became a member of the family. This used to get 1 hour off, and the offs used to be terrible. We were sweating, drenching, and both of them would carry him around. He'd have a lot of pain, so a lot of massaging would be done, and he would come on for another 1 hour. This another 1 hour was him dancing for half the hour with quite severe dyskinesias. Another half an hour, he'd be fairly okay. So this was his life throughout the day. This was the life of his family members throughout the day. And he improved quite a lot. And this is him. He's actually able to work to a fair degree. And he does have a bit of gait problem. But he is able to, this is him some 14 years after the surgery or 15 years after the surgery. So this is a gentleman who's able to walk most of the time. He does have difficulties at times. That's not that he doesn't disappear, but he's able to do most of his work on his own and is independent. That's what makes this a very remarkable. This is 13 years after surgery. 2003 it was done. So basically, what we need to realize is that somewhere along the line, you're going to have advanced PD in most of the patients when you start having wearing off on and off dyskinesias and motor complications. And later on, if you wait too long, you'll end up with the levodopa resistant symptoms and the cognitive decline. DBS, as I told you, is a remarkable therapy. And it is basically flexible because of the programming. And basically, it is much better than what you get in thalidomide and palidotomy. So this is a lady who was again operated around 2007 or 8. I forgot the exact year. She's in Chennai right now. And this is her jogging some 6 or 7 years after, maybe 8 or 9 years after the surgery. Her son, who's there, was getting married some, this is around 2014 or so. And he used to complain that the main problem was her chapatis were not round. But she took the plunge, she got surgery done. And this is her dancing during her son's wedding. And this is her, actually, this is a very remarkable video because that's her sister-in-law. And as you can make out, both of them are preparing chapatis, which are fairly good. And why it's remarkable is because both of them have undergone DBS for Parkinson's disease. The sister-in-law got it done a couple of years or 3 years back. So as you can see, sometimes it can be quite remarkable that you see such things in life, that both of them are sitting and preparing chapatis and both of them got a DBS done. Now, what about the overall impact? There have been a meta-analysis done, and this was done in 2018. And this Brastos et al., they actually analyzed all the published data, which includes trials covering from 19 to as many as 366 patients. This is on the DBS STN. Okay. And they compared all this is evaluated versus the best medical therapy available at that point of time. As you can see, these are the forest plots of these, and this is the UPDRS1, the UPDRS2 Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, the UPDRS3 and the UPDRS4. These are the various subsections. The UPDRS3 is the one which looks at the motor manifestations. UPDRS1 is actually basically the cognitive, and UPDRS2 is the activities of daily living. And as you can see, all the forest plots in favor the DBS as compared to the best medical therapy. Now, this is quite clear that it is definitely much better than the best medical therapy when you actually do a controlled trial in each of these things. And the best results are actually seen in the UPDRS in the 3, which is off, as compared to the UPDRS 3, which is on. So UPDRS 3 is one which has the most remarkable improvement, and this not seen with any other form of therapy. If you actually want to improve the patient throughout the day, it has to be DBS. But then there are downsides to that too, because it is based brain surgery. This is the PDQ 39. This is what the patients and the relatives. They also favor DBS as compared to best medical therapy. And these are all the studies. All studies tend to do this, not one, all. And the LED, which is the levodopa equivalent dosage, is actually reduced compared to this. So this is the situation with as far as DBS is concerned. Only problem is that the serious adverse events, which is basically falls, that is definitely in favor of medical therapy, because you don't get so many falls as you get after DBS. The patient is more mobile, little unstable, they tend to fall. You need to be careful. It is not all a hunky-dory story. The patients get better, but you have to take the risks that come with it. The risks are not much. This is our publication, which we did about, was published in the IN journal. This is 40 odd patients we studied, and they also got better. This is the functional outcome. As you can see, the UPDRS 3 is the one which is markedly improved, which is the off state. On state is also improved, but the off state improvement is what is remarkable. The on state is as good or a little better, but the off state is remarkably better. It is much less also. The on time is much longer. There are the non-motor symptoms also improve, as you can see, mainly and weight change. Weight change, actually the patient gain weight, but they lose this subsequently. You also have other non-motor score symptoms, which you can see the domains pre and post. And this is basically, there's a reduction, quite a few things like sleep and fatigue reduces, urinary from complaints reduce, GIT. So, but we do have some problems with the miscellaneous complaints that the patients have. The intraoperative role is of the neurologist is to make sure that the electrodes are in the right place. If you're going to do this, you jolly well better well know how to do the planning. In our center, and I've been very, very strong votary of this, we are very clear that you have to be in the MRI, do the planning. Our surgeons do it on the frame link. We do it on the MRI. That is Dr. Rukmini and myself. We plan on the MRI console. Then we look at the coordinates to make sure there's no muck up and the electrodes are in the right place. Second thing, we are in the OT, and our job in the OT is crucial because the surgeon is the main bus driver, which is Dr. Rajesh, and we are the conductors. If he doesn't get us in the right place, no matter what we do, whether we plan, whether we choose the right patient, we are not going to get in the right place. So it's very, very crucial that the surgeon gets us in the right place. And we help him. How do we help him? We do the recordings. These are the recordings at various depths when you go all the way down to the STN and then go down all to the SNR. I'll just give you an example, which you can see. This is a very old video, which is already I've seen. This is from 2003. This is actually Dr. Manas who did this, but we've got many others. As you can see, the electrodes are going down all the way. These are the microelectrodes being put up, connected. This is the benefit of the residents who haven't seen one. And once you got all the entire array of 5 microelectrodes, this is called the Ben gun, which is then lowered down. Sorry. This is the recording of the microelectrode recording. And you can see, this is when you are in the thalamus, very little firing. Once you enter the subthalamic nucleus, the firing is much more. And this is the firing that you see. Broad-based, high-frequency discharges. You can see this. These are the high-frequency discharges. You are in the STN, you are in the right place. And after this recording, we subsequently do the stimulation. In the stimulation, we look for 3 things. We look at the rigidity, we look at the akinesia, we look at the akinesia, the rigidity, and the tremor, if there is one. And we see the reduction with and without stimulation. This is akinesia without the current being turned on. Once the micro electrodes are in, we're using the macro electrodes. This is the improvement on the table. As you can see, the speed is much faster once the current is turned on. And you do this at various depths. This is the akinesia in the hand before the current is turned on. And this is after. You can see the speed improving markedly. And this is the rigidity. You check the rigidity at the wrist and at the knee. You can check elsewhere also, but this is basically cutting a long story short. This is post the current being turned on. If you turn on the current at each and every level, you can see the difference. You turn the current off, it comes back to the previous state. And this is the, sorry, I seem to have misplaced that one. This is the tremor, sorry.
You put on the current.
This is the current comes on, the tremor subsides. You are doing one side at one time, so you can see the current subsiding first and then going on to the other side. This is unilateral. So this is the current going on. And you are looking for side effects. If you're too medial, you will. If you're too anterior or too lateral, you'll end up in the pyramidal tract. So you'll be stimulating that at low currents. And if your improvement will be if you're right in the subthalamic nucleus, all these, and you get dyskinesias. And if you're too medial or too posterior, you'll get sensory symptoms. So this is basically what you're looking for when you're on the table. You're making sure that you're doing the right stimulation, getting the final contacts in the right place. The right contacts are seen by Lozano's technique. You pass a line through the anterior part of the red nucleus and come to the lateral part and 3 millimeters lateral. That is where you want your final DBS electrode to be. That's what you're doing a recording for. And this is what the whole thing is about. You have to make sure you're not too down deep also. So you take 2 mm slices, 0 mm interslice interval, and see that the last one, at least 1 or 2 contacts are right through the area you want that to be. Problem is that if you're too high, you don't get any benefits. If you're too medial, too lateral, you end up with stimulating the wrong targets. So this is a patient who was actually too deep. He was operated in 2009, came to us in 2010, and we saw that the contacts are way too deep. So we actually had to pull it up. And this you can see here, this was his before. All the 4 contacts are too deep. So he was not getting any benefit whatsoever. When you pull it up, come to the right level, you get the right contacts. Other thing that helps us is that if you know which 2 contacts to use, you can cut down your programming very markedly. So basically we use 130 Hertz, 60 microvolts, microseconds current, and we go increasing the current. We start the same day the electrodes are put in. We don't really wait. It doesn't make much of a sense because whatever you do, there is going to be fluctuation, and these fluctuations in the same contact, same level, same current is going to happen over the next 6 months or to 9 months. So you have to wait. Whatever you do, some patients may settle down smoothly, other patients will fluctuate a lot. There is a risk. The surgery is not risk-free. You can get symptomatic hemorrhage in 2%, asymptomatic up to 6%. 0.4% of the patients may die. So you do not ever take this surgery lightly. You do not recommend DBS wherever it can be managed with medical therapy alone. So the other side of the story is the benefits are also very good. You need to be careful while passing. The electrode should not go through the caudate. You can end up with a cognitive decline, but other things are quite okay. You can make out more or less what happens. You do look for the other things like diplopia, overstimulation, and then manage the patient subsequently. After that, you need to be very careful. The best predictor for outcome is actually the improvement that you see in the on-off. If there's a marked improvement, his patient is going to get much better. Now, what happens is that when you have rigidity, bradykinesia, tremor, and motor fluctuations, you do a conservative reduction of the drugs. Reduce the anticholinergics first, the COMT inhibitors subsequently, amantadine, and then the MAO inhibitors. And this should be slow. Don't try to reduce too energetically. You'll end up with a hypodopaminergic state. You keep the levodopa on as much as possible. Try to reduce a little bit, but not too much. And what you can see is that after 1 year, you end up with a 30 to 50% reduction in the drugs. This is with STM stimulation, not with GPI. And you can get the major reduction is in the first 6 months. You definitely do not work on removing all the medicines, because what happens is you need more current, the battery will drain out faster, which we can't afford in a poor country like ours. And secondly, you get a hypotonic state, which leads to apathy and depression. And these are the basic side effects that you can expect: motor signs, cognition, mood disorders, behavior and other psychiatric issues. And these are all have others. Memory, executive function in cognition can be mildly affected, but what you can get is even fluctuations and dyskinesias caused by the DBS, which can be managed and over time. And the apathy, the depression, the anxiety needs to be seen and managed accordingly. Similarly, you can get ICDs, impulse control disorders, delusions, hallucinations, DDS, which is dopaminergic disabuse syndrome, and Panding. You can get autonomic dysfunction. I will not go through all this. I'll just highlight a few of them. Some sleep quality can be affected, and you can get some pain. So the hypotonic symptom is basically caused by the doctors being too aggressive in the dopaminergic withdrawal syndrome. And this can get, that's why you get in about 1/4 of the patients a negative assessment at 3 months. So this happens with too rapid a reduction of the dopaminergic agonists. This patient was operated last September, October, before he came from Delhi, and this was his off state. This was him. He was having a tough time because he couldn't come because of COVID, but we were managing him on WhatsApp. So on WhatsApp, you get the videos, tell them to alter the drugs and also to alter the current settings, because they have a patient program. And as you can see, his off got better. This was his off before, and this is off now after 4 months. And this is actually his getting much better by about 8 or 9 months down the line. And as you can see, you ask them to maintain also, not in addition to this, you ask them to maintain a on-off diary, which is green is on and off is red is off. And as you can see, slowly, this is in April, this is in October. And as you can see, slowly the greens became more and the ons became much longer. So there's a marked shift from the off to the on. Apathy is the main problem with reducing dopaminergic agonists too early. So you can add pramipexole, you can add safinamide, and these do help in addition to the levodopa. Anxiety is a little difficult because there are no trials to prove which works. We try the standard anti-anxiety drugs. Depression responds well to your dopaminergic agonists as well as to cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is a lady who actually came to us, and this is why you need a movement disorder specialist involved in this, because she was otherwise fine, but she was having this complaint of this tremor. She's already undergone the surgery. Her problem was that this tremor was distractible. So just increasing the current just because she's got a tremor, or increasing the drug because this tremor is there, is not correct, because this was actually a functional tremor. And you can see her smiling, and this distractibility is so very clear cut. Her husband was in Dubai. She wanted him back. He gave her more attention and she got better. So this is why you need to be careful about other movement disorders occurring in patients with DBS. Suicides can occur. We really don't know why, but this happens even in patients of Parkinson's disease who have not undergone surgery. So right now we are not really clear as to what is the association, or right now when you did a randomized control study which looked at this versus the best medical therapy, they found no direct association between the suicidal behavior and DBS. You need to be clear when you do the candidate selection to avoid patients who have suicidal ideation or attempts after STM DBS. You need to respond promptly to those. So your hypotonic symptoms, which you can see, would be apathy, anxiety, and depression. This is basically because of over-reduction of the dopaminergic agonist. And you need to, if there you see that is there, you increase the dopaminergic agonist. If there is no such reduction, you check your DBS settings and try to avoid the ventromedial region of the STM. That means you go up if there's one contact in the ventral and medial region. use the higher contact. Cognition, there is some degree of post-op cognitive decline, but this stabilizes, and over a long time, it is about 17% from, which is actually mild executive function, mild decline in verbal memory and executive functioning, and moderate decline in verbal fluency. Beyond that, day-to-day functioning is rather okay, but then the disease is progressive. So when you get PDD, you need to monitor cognition and see what is going on. So our study showed there was a decline in verbal fluency in about after 6 months, and in our study here. This patient was actually came to us from Nigeria. His son was actually in Ireland and a doctor. This patient had been operated, and his main problem was that he was very, very slow. He was akinetic. This is pre-op, and this is his pre-op on. So he could not go to the toilet. He had been operated for a meningioma. He had mild dementia, and the son, who was a doctor in Ireland, said that I don't want my father better cognitively, but I definitely want him mobile because he's not able to go to the loo and people are not able to get him there. So this was his off before surgery, and this was his off after surgery, and this was his on after surgery. As you can see, he's better. He actually improved for the next 2 years, and this was what he got to the gym. Unfortunately, we lost him subsequently. But what happens is that you give them quite a few years of good life, and they get better at that. This lady is a school teacher, now a headmistress, and she was operated in 2010. This was her in the off stage then, and this was her 2016, happily dancing away, put on some weight, I think. But she got a battery change last year, and she's doing well, and she's a school principal, functioning well. So what we need to know is that patients do maintain their cognitive stability and do well in the vast majority, but the disease is progressive. The older patients, the patients with more cognitively impaired, the more axial symptoms, they tend to get worse. We do have cognitive decline in these patients, but that we are not sure whether it's part of the DBS or part of the disease burden per se. You can try rivastigmine, but the cholinesterase inhibitors and memantine have also been tried. But cholinesterase inhibitors are supposed to be better. This is a lady who got who had very severe ICD. She's in the form that she used to suspect her husband fidelity. She came to us in 2012, didn't get surgery done, came to us in 2015, and she was very, very suspicious. She used to hit her head very hard, even if against the wall, if the husband stepped out of the room. So they got very scared. We got very scared. We did the surgery. She got better. This patient is another patient who had hypersexuality as a problem before surgery. He touched one nurse on the way when he was coming to see me the first time, got arrested, was released, did it again, was put in jail. And from the jail, he used to come with an armed escort. If you're in jail, you can get a free DBS. This was before now. And so we got a free DBS for him. Subsequently, now, of course, the government is giving a lot of money to all the patients, and we are able to do a lot of free DBSs for the patients. But that was a time when we had to pay for every patient, and that was difficult. So you have hypotonic syndromes also. So you need to be careful. This is basically the male sex, younger previous history, younger age of onset, and those who are on high doses of dopaminergic agonists. You have ICDs, and basically you need to be sure that you avoid the most medial and inferior contacts on stimulation in these patients. We did look about 20 of our patients, and our patients, 10% became ICD free. Some developed new ICDs like compulsive shopping and punning, and 35% had an improvement in their ICDs, while some had equal number had a little worsening post DBS. This psychosis is related to the disease progression per se. It could be you try to take off all the drugs, starting with the anticholinergics, followed by amantadine, dopaminergic agonists, and lastly levodopa. You could try clozapine or quetiapine, but this is how we manage these. So you have the other side is the hypodopaminergic syndromes, which is the ICDs, the hypomania, the psychosis, and you try to manage this by reducing the agonists and avoiding the ventromedial spread of contact, the lower contacts. Also reduce the medicines. You can add other drugs if you can. What's interesting is that when you follow these patients for a very long time, many years, you can see that there's a gradual reduction in the current that you use, and which is more or less stable, the current, which you can see in the dashed line, and the LEDs tend to increase after some time. Subsequently, even the current is increased because you then start having the PDDs and others, and you don't want to increase the drug so much. Psychiatric changes are also seen, and in our patients, which when we studied them, we saw a few. Most of them got better, though some patients have new onset depression and new onset psychosis. You have autonomic dysfunction also coming down. Basically, not much of a difference before and after. And there was a definite status quo as far as this was concerned. Freezing of gait is one of the bigger problems that we have, because what we basically try to do is avoid the abrupt reduction of dopaminergic agonists and do a low frequency stimulation. But we are also trying higher frequency when they have, when they have freezing. This is a patient who has freezing, same prisoner I told you about. But he's free most of the time, and we are adjusting this by adjusting the current. We did look at the frequency modifications, and we found that it varies from patient to patient. Some patients actually need to reduce the current, some of them stay, the frequency stays stable. This is not constant, it varies between the same patient also. We also looked at the dyskinesias. There's a marked reduction in the dyskinesias. And basically we reduced the levodopa, then we think of adding amantadine. Right now we are thinking of, we add Safenact in most of the patients. And we look at the more dorsal contacts. You cannot take dyskinesias lightly. You can lose patients with dyskinesia. This is a patient who had a very severe dyskinesia, and we lost him because of the dyskinesia. So you can't take anything lightly. He had some of the most severe dyskinesia you can ever see. Sorry. Is this running? No. Hello. With that, I think this was another patient, which I already showed you this, so I will not show you that again. The last point I wanted to touch is the most controversial one about whether DBS is protective or not protective, neuroprotective. It's been shown in animal experiments, rats basically, to show that there's a definite beneficial effect, not been shown in clinical studies, except this one recent study which came out in 2018 in the Green Journal Neurology. These authors were very brave. They looked at the best medical treatment, which is ODT, which is optimal drug therapy, versus DBS versus ODT. And they had a 7-day washout, so that neither, every time they assessed, which is at 0, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 24 months, they actually looked at the 7-day washout to take out the influence of the drugs and of the DBS. And what they got was remarkable. They found that there's a worsening of the patients with ODT, but the DBS and ODT, which is the optimal drug therapy, were actually more or less stable at the 6 months interval. And this was very clearly seen in the rest tremors. New rest tremor was seen, de novo development of rest tremor was actually seen in patients with the ODT, but not in DBS ODT patients. And this was also seen, as you can see, that this is the rest tremor score, and patients are actually much better with the DBS ODT as far as compared to only optimal drug therapy. The current was not changed, and the drugs were actually increasing only in the patients with the optimal drug therapy. So in spite of that, the new rest tremor was not developing in these patients. So the question is this actually improving the patients or not letting them develop new symptoms? That we need to see. This is our very first patient who was, and this is the last slide, he operated in 2000. He was very bad in 2000. Most of the time he was like this. And this was him after surgery. But he was able to walk for a few minutes with festination before surgery. This was him after 5 years. And this was him after some 7 odd years. And this was him in 2016, 16 years later. And we have him here as late as this year beginning. Unfortunately, he passed away after that. But this is a man who could walk for 19 years with support eventually, but he could walk, which he could not do initially, where he needed two people to make him walk. And he had 50 years of disease. He started in when he was 30 years old. He had 40 years of disease, almost 40 to 50 years of disease. And he has survived very, very long with Parkinson's disease. So we don't know what we are doing with DBS, but we do know that we are helping the patients to a tremendous degree. And this is a very good therapy and needs to be used widely. Thank you.
Thanks, Rupam. That was a wonderful exposition of what can be done to DBS patients of Parkinson's disease. What it eventually translates down to is selection of the right patient, selection of the right placement of leads, and appropriate current stimuli and explanation thereof, and correcting the minor psychological problems that can happen post DBS. So with this end of our Rupam's presentation, I don't see any questions in the chat box.
Rupam, I have got a question for you.
Sir,
This-
please go ahead.
Your relationship with surgeon, like conductor and the
Bus
driver, ends with the surgery or continues
No,
beyond
no,
that?
no. The patients can get complications. You can get infection. You can get patient can fall down. You can have the battery going off. Patients come after many years with a dead battery. Surgeons need to be responsive.
Yeah.
And despite our limitations of working in a hospital which is more government than private, you have to manage. We have one of the largest programs going on, but it's basically because the surgeons do a lot of hard work. This is not without hard work. You cannot take this casually as a surgeon. We have quite a few surgeons doing this. If you try to do this casually, you're going to end up with problems.
So may I?
Thanks.
So may I?
Yeah, please.
The relationship between a neurologist and a neurosurgeon for DBS is more than a bus conductor and a driver. It is actually the target is basically defined on an MRI or even on a FrameLink or any other software. But after that definition, it has to be refined. Defined has to be refined, and that is what a neurologist does, getting up to the correct position of the nucleus and giving us the guidance as this is what is probably correct. It's a double check. You cannot forego. The recent trend is to undo the microelectrode recording and direct putting up of the leads. Probably that might be good in the center, but this we find is very important for a good outcome.
Sir, in your experience, how many patients you had instrument rejection, yes, rejection, where the patient's wires come out due to autoimmune reaction? And how do you manage them?
See, the wires, there is erosion of the battery. We had this happened with there are not very many actually. It will be less than 1 to 2%. But what we do get is infection. Infection would be around 3 to 4%. But erosion through the skin and battery sticking out, especially the new battery, which is more angular rather than rounded, is a problem. But it's not more than 3% or so, 3 to 4%.
Yes, sir. We have a series of 55 patients. Out of the 3 of the patients have this wire coming out here. So
Coming out where?
Just behind the ear. Just after 1 year or 1.5 years post surgery. And we try to keep it back using the plastic surgeon, but still it pops out. How to manage this?
Once it's out, you got to take it out. There's no question of putting it back. I very rarely is infection controlled with antibiotics. It happens. You get lucky very rarely. You try to stick it out, but by and large, you have to explant and do it on the other side. If you're unlucky and your DBS electrode has got involved, then you got to take out the whole thing.
After 1.5 year, it's coming out. And
yeah, it happens. Many years later also it happens. Patients scratch themselves. They have problems. That can happen even after 5 years, 7 years. By and large, it happens initially. And there are some patients who have a recurrence of that infection. I mean, you take it out, put it back, and second time also, then there are people you can't do much about. because it's very traumatic. It's not easy for these patients to put up with this sort of infection and going through the entire surgical cycle. There's a lot of stress and strain. Finances are also involved.
And counseling is also very
Yeah, you
important.
tell them repeatedly, but finance is such a huge amount for them. If you're getting it free, then even then it's not easy.
You have 3 patients whose wives keep popping out like this. You don't know what to do with them.
There's no shortcuts to that. You explant, wait for 3 months, then go back again and do it on the other side.
And Dr. Rajesh?
The thing is, if we had a couple of cases where the leads had come out, so after having reviewed all the cases, the position of the lead in the initial onset, when you are placing it on the first time itself, it should be better be a bit deeper than be superficial. That is the only thing that you can probably do. And the second thing is, now we had started for past a year and so that we have started to add vancomycin powder. I don't know how much it works or how much is it giving, or the technique has improved over the years with the numbers. But then we have not seen infection in probably past a year or so, whatever we had implanted.
Vancomycin inside that cap, sir. Where exactly?
Yeah, both the scalp wounds and on the battery side.
Batteries as well.
Yeah, 1 gram each for each and 2 grams for the battery site. So 4 grams of vancomycin we instill at the time. We do not know, we are not sure, but this is what is a standard practice that they do in a couple of centers in US.
I think we can also adapt this one.
Yeah.
Very nice presentation, sir, on the experience.
Year or so. Has to be
We learned a
handled
lot.
by-
Every time we hear a presentation, we learn a lot. Where exactly?
both the scalp wounds and on the battery side.
Batteries as well.
Yeah, 1 gram each for each and 2 grams for the battery site. So 4 grams of vancomycin we instill it at the time. We do not know, we are not sure, but this is what is a standard practice that they do in a couple of centers in the US.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rupam, for your excellent presentation.
Thanks, Rupam. Thank you, Dr. Dairevan, for
Yeah,
the session, and we thank the organizers for having given us this.
Thank you, Kumarvel, sir.